Well, hello everyone. My name is Jane Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. You're listening to Healing Outside the Box. Today is episode 227, and I'm calling it, Where Have All the Dietitians Gone? Or, Where Have All the Dietitians Gone? Now, I'm guessing that this question hasn't been keeping you up at night, but stay with me, because if we don't think the existence of dietitians is very important, then that right there might be the problem. Because, ladies and gentlemen, dietitians have been around all along without anyone noticing that we are here. I used to say jokingly that dietitians are the Rodney Dangerfields of the healthcare industry. Now, I probably should pause here for all you youngins that are listening and explain who Rodney Dangerfield is. He was the old guy in Caddyshack. But more specifically, Rodney Dangerfield is famous for saying, "I get no respect." Needless to say, dietitians are, hands down, the least respected professional in the healthcare field. If there is a pecking order in a hospital, and I believe there is, dietitians get pecked to death by just about everyone else. I'll give you just a quick story about how this revealed itself to me in the hospital, and then we'll get back to the podcast. After I had been at my first dietitian job for about a year, I visited an overweight, newly diagnosed diabetic patient who had multiple medical problems. She had also just undergone surgery. I checked out her chart and visited this patient for the first time. I sat down and we exchanged pleasantries. I was sitting talking to her next to her bed, and we started to discuss the dietary management of her disease. And remember, her disease, or multiple diseases, were having a dramatic effect on the quality of her life. So I'm in the middle of a sentence when I hear fast-moving footsteps heading toward us. The next thing I know, the curtain is quickly drawn in front of my face as the surgeon nearly tripped over my feet, walking past me with the curtain, never even acknowledging that I was there. He pulled the curtain between myself and the patient and started abruptly talking to the patient, who I'm guessing was as shocked as I was, but I couldn't know for sure because I had my nose in the curtain and she was on the other side. To this day, I still remember staring at a dingy hospital curtain, not quite knowing what to do next. Again, the surgeon never acknowledged that there was actually another human being in the room. He could have just hit me in the face with a fry pan. It was a curtain, actually, I know, but it could have been a fry pan. I sat there stunned for a moment, and then, with my tail between my legs, I quietly left the room. I didn't know what I was going to write in the chart, because we had hardly gotten to any information sharing or assessment doing. So that, in a nutshell, is how dietitians are viewed in our society. While I was working at that first hospital job, the dietitians were the only health professional in the hospital not reimbursed by insurance companies. And yet, most of the diseases that bring people to the hospital are diet-related. Even back then, there was a diabetes floor directly related to diet, a stroke floor directly related to diet and smoking, a heart attack and cardiac rehab floor, again related to diet. The surgery floor may have had one or two patients that I was seeing at any given day who were there for amputations related to uncontrolled diabetes. And about 90% of the dialysis patients were also uncontrolled diabetics. And 90 to 95% of all diabetics are type 2 diabetics, which are almost always related to weight, which is related to blood pressure and heart disease, etc. I happened to be covering the ICU-CCU one day when the first 600-pound patient was admitted, and I saw the words, "nutrition consult," in his chart. I remember one of the nurses walking up to me and saying, "Exactly what does the doctor think that you're going to do for this guy now that he's over 600 pounds? I may have said something like, "I know, I'm 400 pounds too late." This poor guy also had related social issues. The EMTs had to take about his front door to get him to the hospital. I noticed the nurses gave the wife disapproving looks, because after all, she was the one going out to buy hundreds of dollars worth of McDonald's or Burger King dinners every night. I also remember that one of the nurses said, "How did he get this big?" And another nurse said, "Well, look at us. We are all overweight. If it were so easy, we would all be thin." And that quieted everyone down. Now, on the other end of the scale, literally, let's not forget about all of the patients with anorexia nervosa or bulimia who were either on the pediatric unit or the psych unit, again, all diet related. But you can't take stress and other psychosocial issues out of the equation. Maybe you're thinking now, in the year 2019, when we're all so smarter, these dietitians must be worth their weight in gold, given that all of these conditions have gotten worse. Well, think again. I can only tell you about my own story, but I had plenty of education walking into this, and not very much respect. I had a BS from University of New Hampshire, a master's degree from Cornell University. I completed an internship, studied for 3 months for my registered dietitian certification, and after all that I was making $9.35 per hour. I kid you not. Right now, and that is as of November 1st, 2019, there are currently 104,000 registered dietitians in the U.S. Now, the highest paid dietitians, this is the highest, make $58,000 per year after they have 3 to 5 years experience. So that's a peak. The lowest paid dietitians make $17,000 per year. So the good earners are making about $28 per hour. If they have a master's degree and 1 year internship, that's 7 years of college if you're counting, they are making $59,000 per year. A registered dietitian with a PhD makes about $63,000. And remember, many RDs are still making $17,000. And this bachelor's degree is nothing you can phone in. It requires organic chemistry, anatomy and physiology, calculus, physics, and many additional courses like statistics and management. Now, is there one answer as to why their pay is so low? I wish I didn't have to say this, but it is an exclusively female profession. Literally 500 to 1. And I believe the answer is right there. Back in the old days, I don't know about the good old days, but back in the 50s, or maybe 60s, people would assume that dietitians were glorified home economics ladies, and their salary reflected that. I remember once when I went to a registered dietitian conference, they actually put a W-O or a WO in front of all the men's rooms because there were simply no men at the conference center. I remember I was in one conference room with approximately 500 or 600 seats, and I looked around and I didn't see a single man. And granted, I was looking from a seated position, but I can imagine very few professions where you can look around a room of 500 people and see no males in the audience. Now, I hope I'm not discouraging men from joining the dietitian forces. In fact, if you're looking to pick up a single woman and want a good wife, it's probably the best place on earth. Okay, so what exactly does a dietitian do in a hospital? I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's boring, but I'll run through the responsibilities of a registered dietitian in a hospital setting. First, there is a screening, which usually involves looking at the diet order and reviewing the chart in detail. We look at the lab results and other test results, look at the medical diagnosis, thinking about setting up a nutrition diagnosis when we come back to the chart. We also look at the physician notes to see where the physician is going with this patient. And that's helpful when we go in and start asking questions with the patient himself or herself. So then when we enter the room, there's usually a visual observation, skin tone, color, alertness, general demeanor. Are they anxious, relaxed, etc.? We may look for hand shakiness, whether or not they have a swollen belly, things like that. And then we have a conversation with the patient about what's going on, and ask about symptoms related to diet, digestion, things like that. If we know they already have diabetes, there'll be a separate set of questions about that. Same with heart disease. And then we go back to the chart and put together notes. There may be a specific nutrition diagnosis that is separate than the medical diagnosis. And then we write a note in the medical chart, which is hopefully, but not always, read by physicians and other medical personnel that are taking care of this specific patient. In the outpatient setting, it's a similar process. The dietitian will read the chart of the patient prior to the initial visit, and there will be a specific diet order. Dietitians usually prepare notes ahead of time that will supplement the original physician order. For example, the physician might say low cholesterol diet, but then the dietitian will review the chart to find out if the patient has had any recent weight gain or weight loss, or any abnormal lab values, or other conditions such as diabetes, liver or kidney disease. Dietitians will also read physician notes in the outpatient chart to get a feeling about how medical care has progressed for this particular patient. My prep as an outpatient dietitian might take me about 20 to 30 minutes. Then the initial visit with the patient is usually an hour. The initial goal is to establish rapport with the person because dietitians assume there's always a certain anxiety factor involved in a first meeting. Putting someone at ease with an exchange of pleasantries, as I like to call it, might make a significant difference in how the rest of the hour will go. If a person doesn't like or trust the dietitian, it's doubtful that follow-up sessions will ever happen. We are a little like dentists in that regard. Our job is often seen as asking people to do what they are really not that interested in doing, namely giving up their comfort foods. The newly trained dietitian often focuses a lot of energy on understanding human behavior to help people make changes themselves that are as close to the usual eating habits as possible. In other words, laying out a bunch of food groups and pointing a finger at one of them simply doesn't work, and we've known that for some time. Registered dietitians now study psychological techniques such as stages of change and motivational interviewing. So we see our job now as helping people to make changes in their lifestyle habits that will stay with them a lifetime. And that's not such an easy thing to do. Now, what I'm about to say is why I started this whole rant today. Ultimately, I believe we will learn that most people need and should receive weekly counseling or assistance of some kind to adopt healthy eating and overall wellness habits. It's just not okay to say that a newly diagnosed diabetic can receive 1 hour of instruction and then go off to completely change their eating habits all by themselves. As the nurses in that ICU were saying many years ago, it's just too difficult for all of us. And I think it's time we acknowledge this. So this weekly counseling could be done over the phone or maybe a Skype-like thing, so we could sit there in our pajamas if we want. Obviously, that would be cost-effective to do it that way. Whatever suits the needs of the person. This counseling could be done by a dietitian or a nurse or someone that specializes in psychological counseling. Again, the needs of the person should dictate this. We could set up dietary or wellness goals in general over a longer period of time and then make specific weekly goals. These goals could include dietary goals, exercise goals, stress reduction goals, whatever the person needs. And all of this should be paid for by health insurance. Again, it's going to be cost effective if there are no buildings involved. Every time I go to a doctor's office, I look at the paintings on the wall and think, how much is that costing patients? Because they're quite nice. And as we all know, the buildings themselves and the equipment in the offices are the latest, greatest technology and very expensive. So we should focus our dollars on the patient, not on the building, because ultimately it will cost us so much more, both in suffering and in dollars, if 100 million of us have diabetes, heart disease, obesity, fatty livers, kidney disease, or all of the above. So if we choose to, we could touch base with one of these health professionals on a weekly basis, and it won't cost that much. But we should do it not because it's cost effective, but because it is the ethical thing to do. Again, I believe we will look back on this time and think we were crazy not to think of it earlier. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can go about starting this crusade. Any thoughts you have, even if it seems crazy or unfeasible, just send me your thoughts. What I'm hoping to do very soon is write my senator a letter, and maybe she could put together a plan for that. And you probably already guessed, by the reference to she and a plan, my senator is Elizabeth Warren. And again, I'm not telling anyone to vote for her or any particular candidate, but we should support the people that are in our corner. It just makes sense to me. So please contact me on my website contact page. My website, by the way, is healingoutsidethebox.com, and just click on contact. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.